So I'll start with Liz, if you don't mind. The supercorals, very, very cool. How old are those things? I mean, were they always there and we just didn't know they were there? Or does the team who's studying them, do they believe they've been becoming like that because of all this aggression that we're doing to the environment? Do they have some insight into that?
I think it's a very good question. I think I would answer it in this perspective is that firstly, sometimes things are sitting right under your nose, but you don't see them because your vision is a little bit further afield. And so many of the scientists had been working actually around the Maldives, and they'd been studying coral reefs in that zone. Because of the impact of the pandemic, they decided that obviously they couldn't travel, but they would really go and have a look at the coral reefs, the urban coral reefs. And so it was interesting for them to observe these urban coral reefs from the perspective of how they have had to adapt. The adaptation has come over time, but they've had to adapt because the water is quite turbulent. It has different types of waste that comes from impacts of fishing and cargo that is happening in the area. But I think what they found was interesting when they were looking at these coral reefs was the fact that the coral has become quite what we would call horizontal. And it's had to do that because it's really trying to absorb as much light as it can. And when we consider that in Southeast Asia particularly, it's going to be the hardest hit, one of the hardest hit from sea level rise in the future. These corals are really struggling to try and capture as much sunlight as they can, so they've gone horizontal. Now, the second thing I found that was super interesting was the fact that the corals had actually started to grow very long tentacles. And so coral reefs usually don't have long tentacles, but they have grown long tentacles to try and reach up into the water column and not just absorb the sunlight, but try and find energy from tiny, tiny filaments that are in the water. And so they have adapted to try and meet the environment that they are living in. And so in a sense, that gives us a little bit of hope because these urban coral reefs have been in the vicinity of shipping, more turbulent water that happens when you're close to shore. And they've also had quite a lot of wash-off that's been happening around that zone. So we can see that some corals can be or have become resilient. Whereas in more pristine coral reefs, particularly like the Great Barrier Reef, it has lived in a fairly pristine environment for a long period of time and it's now under stress, but its adaptation hasn't had to deal with that stress over long periods of time. So I think that what we're seeing is a greater collaboration between the scientific community and between the ocean scientific community. And I know that at the Earth Observatory of Singapore, they're looking to study not just in Singapore, but in Indonesia and in Singapore, in the Philippines, to really try and garner as much knowledge as they can. And we look at the fact that there are tremendous gaps in knowledge. And so we have to plug the gaps in knowledge around the coral reefs and then share that knowledge and share that data. And I think one of the things that I'm hearing a lot here at the UN conference is the importance of gathering the data, finding where the knowledge gaps are, and working out how to share data. And I think that the Earth Observatory of Singapore is really leading the way in Southeast Asia in doing that and being very collaborative. And I think that whole collaboration locally and globally is going to be very, very important in the next decade.
Excellent. Thank you so much.